Hey guys, Justin with the Modern Warrior Project. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the 11 criteria that we use when we're approaching a new location or evaluating an environment for how risky it is. You're going to find that this stuff applies to your daily life, but more importantly, if you incorporate it in your daily life, it's a tool that you'll have at your disposal when you're in an unfamiliar location, when you're traveling for business or pleasure, and you'll find that eventually it becomes so subconscious that you're evaluating these criteria everywhere you go. And that's the idea, is to make CSC a part of your daily life. And to do that, you have to have the knowledge, skills, and experience. So we're going to start today with a little bit of that knowledge component.
How you doing? Shane here. And before we move into talking on the specific criteria, I do want to lay out something and make sure that it's clear. Each individual criteria that we tell you to look at is not necessarily a hard factor. It's not necessarily a right or a wrong, but you kind of think of it as a scale. And then when you put all of those together at the end, you look at the collective picture of that particular establishment, and that'll help you to determine the level of danger that's present and whether or not it's acceptable to you in your own level of risk that you're willing to take. All right, so one of the things we want to consider is access and accessibility when we look at a location. On access, you're considering who has access to that location. Is it a controlled entry point? Is it a public, a gas station? Or is it a TSA checkpoint where you've got to go through security? So you're looking at that and contemplating that. The next thing you want to consider is accessibility to it. And this is where you're considering your parking. How close can I get to the location? What are the ins and outs of getting into this particular facility? And neither one is necessarily good or bad, or they both have their advantages and disadvantages. For instance, on access, it would seem that a controlled access point is more secure. And to an extent that's true. However, it also restricts your ability to quickly get out of there. And likewise, of public access, more people can get in, but more people can get out. Same thing with a criminal. They can get in and out real fast as well. So there's cons, there's advantages and disadvantages to both. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, so like Shane mentioned specifically, certain areas that are controlled access are going to limit the tools that I can bring with me. And there's a famous stand-up comic, Chris Rock, who talks about, you may like going into a party that has a metal detector because no one else has guns in there, but the guy standing outside waiting to mug you likes it just as much because he knows you're not coming out with a gun. So the next criteria that we're going to evaluate is the activity level of the location. So you might think that an area with no activity is safer, and potentially that could be the case. But the reality is that an area with no activity and an area with a lot of activity both present unique opportunities for an aggressor. The more activity you have, the greater the opportunity for them to get close to you before it's noticed. You don't think anything of it when there's a lot of people going in and out of a parking lot, but if I'm a bad guy, I can use that to my advantage. And if there's no activity, the opportunity for me to act without a witness being present or somebody to intervene is also high. So generally speaking, a medium level of activity for whatever is normal at that location is going to be about the best you could hope for. Now, we need to point out that this is all very much subjective, and it's a gray scale. There is nothing that is 100% guaranteed to make you aggressed or targeted, and there's also nothing that's going to make you 100% safe. So as we go through these, continue to understand that you got to weigh the cost and benefit of each. All right, so for our next evaluation criteria, we're going to look at communications capability, which typically boils down to cell phone signal. Now, the intuitive reason for this is obviously if I have a bad cell signal, as a bad guy, I'm probably going to want to make my approach in a location where it's more difficult for somebody to call for help or first responders. But the secondary aspect of that is if a location doesn't have enough of a population to support having a good communication signal, a strong tower nearby, it probably has very long delays in first responder capability as well, because you're most likely going to saturate, from a commercial standpoint, a location with a very expensive tower that it's beneficial to have a lot of customers in that area. You want to make them happy. You want that cell signal to be strong there because there's a big population base. The same is going to be true for police departments and small municipalities that don't have enough money to kind of blanket their entire jurisdiction. They're going to focus on the areas that have the higher concentration of people. So that's why we also strongly encourage the use of communication and cell signal as an indicator of how risky a location might be.
The criteria we want to look at is cleanliness, and that's of the facility itself as well as the surrounding area. The general fact is that if a place looks upkept and the area around it's upkept, then it probably has a lower crime rate. Kind of goes to the broken window theory, which says that visible crime that's not taken care of perpetuates itself. So if you got a broken window, it doesn't get repaired, then before you know it, someone's going to break the next window and keep on going. It's a pretty interesting study if you want to read it. So ultimately, if it looks like trash on the outside, then it's probably not the safest place. It's kind of common sense, but that's something you want to definitely take into account.
The next element that we really want you to pay attention to is function. What is the specific purpose of the location you're going to? Some locations are going to be inherently valuable. Banks, check cashing locations, really anywhere that keeps a large amount of cash on hand at any given time is going to be inherently more valuable. Then there's the value that comes with maybe social or political points of friction. If you remember back a few years ago, there was several different shootings that took place at recruiting stations as well as on military installations. So the value or function of that particular establishment made it more worth targeting for an individual. So having a clear understanding of why the place you're going actually exists will help you evaluate how risky it is, how valuable that location is, or the individuals that frequent it.
Okay, another thing you want to consider are hazards. And now we're talking about outside of people. Now we're looking at the environmental hazards that are around. What kind of things could impact you getting out of that area fast? What are things that could pose challenges, such as traffic, like that behind me? It's a busy intersection, so that could be a potential hazard if I'm trying to move out of that area real quick. And that's one of the things you want to consider, are all the potential hazards in the respective area that you're going to be visiting.
So next we're going to take a look at red zones and the transitional spaces. Red zones are going to be nothing more than a blind spot. This is any area in your environment that you cannot visually see from where you currently are. Obviously a red zone is going to give an aggressor an opportunity to get close to or take you by surprise. So you want to evaluate what of those exist between where you are and where you're trying to go. And next is transitional spaces. As you've gathered, we're pretty much in a parking lot right now. A transitional space is going to be any location that joins together two or more environments, and by their very nature they are prime for aggressors. They allow an opportunity for an aggressor to get closer to you. They allow an aggressor to act quickly with surprise, kind of similar to red zones, and they allow an opportunity for the aggressor to get away quickly. So as you're evaluating transitional spaces, such as getting from inside of your car to outside of your car, into or out of a building, an elevator, a stairwell, it's important to understand what risks they pose and minimize your time in a transitional space. So for red zones, we're going to want to just visually clear those. Don't walk right up on them. And for transitional spaces, they're impossible to avoid. So we're going to minimize our time in there. We're going to maximize our situational awareness while we're in those environments. Next is people. So we've already specifically addressed the activity level. That's kind of what's going on in the area, but now we're going to look specifically at and scrutinize the individuals present in the environment. Are they behaving signs consistent with known criminal activity? Are they loitering? Are there large groups? Are they staring at you? Are they attempting to avoid eye contact? Are they walking to intercept you? Are they gathering around the entrance of a location? So this is specifically, what are the people in the environment doing, and what type of risk do you think they present you with?
The next point we want to consider is reputation. Reputation of the establishment itself, as well as consider, if you know it, the reputation of the particular area. Is it a high crime area? Is the establishment itself known for fights? A good example is a bar. A bar that is known to be rowdy and there's a fight there every weekend. Obviously that's something you consider. Compare that to, let's say, a mattress store. Not a whole lot of crime you're generally hearing about in mattress stores. Now, beyond that, you want to consider the social and political climate at the time as well. If there's a particular hot topic that's breaking the news, whatever it might be, then and that establishment aligns with that topic, then you should consider that when you're considering the reputation and the possible risk factors involved at frequenting that establishment.
Yes, so one of the things that we talk about is targeted for affiliation. We spoke a little bit earlier about the times when the recruiting depots were shot up. So you may be doing everything right, and you just may be affiliated with something that presents value to an aggressor in those locations as Shane's talking about. If they're in the news and they are drawing a lot of social ire or political ire, you might very well become a victim of something through no fault of your own. So understanding the reputation and the current climate is critical. All right, the last two elements that we're going to talk about. First is secure. It makes sense that an area that has a dedicated guard force, even if they're not an armed guard force, they might not be trained or prepared to come to your aid specifically, but they're going to begin the response a lot sooner, and they might notice something and report it. Security cameras, it's important to know where those are and understand that there's a significant difference between an active security system, like one you're going to find in a casino, where if you start acting a fool, somebody who is a trained surveillance officer who's sitting there watching the cameras and waiting to react is going to put in action a response plan, versus a passive security system like you're going to find really most anywhere else. And that's going to be like your home security system, where okay, something has gone wrong, now they're going to go back and look at the tapes. So obviously the more secure an area is, the less vulnerable you are on any given day. And lastly, we're going to talk about how well lit a location is. If you frequent a location during the day, the time of day can greatly change your assessment. So in an area like this, where you can kind of see multiple light posts around, we get a pretty good feeling that it's going to be well lit at night as well, and that's going to go back to red zones. But having an understanding of how well lit an area is going to help you decide whether you want to bring a big flashlight or you're okay getting away with a little flashlight. So those are the 11 criteria that we talk about in CSC, and a little bit of how they apply. The urban lab really flushes this out, and we talk about all this criteria in person and in actual environments. So if you're interested, check us out. Like, share, follow, subscribe, share.
I think one thing I hit too, and Justin hit on it earlier, is this is all a skill. Kind of like with security. You know, I can think there are some really bad areas where they have security driving around just for that reason. So security in and itself is not necessarily always a good thing. It's just one of these things. It's part of an overall holistic approach you look at when you're considering this establishment. And on that scale, you kind of figure out where this place fits and how concerned I need to be as far as visiting and frequenting it. That makes sense?
It definitely makes sense. It makes more sense than me saying Sharo. And at the end of the day, we just want to make sure that we're passing along all the knowledge we have. So check us out, modernwarriorproject.com. I'm Justin, this is Shane. We look forward to working with all of you guys, and talk to you soon.